Good morning from Algiers, Algeria. We got here a little bit later than we were expecting to, so we did have kind of a dramatic day yesterday. We ended up getting stuck in the Paris airport for 12 hours. We were only supposed to be there for like 5 hours on a layover, but then we couldn't actually board our flight because the person who was supposed to approve our boarding for Air France was unavailable. They didn't pick up the phone, so we ended up getting delayed and having to catch the next flight. The reason that is because we got visas on arrival instead of getting our visas beforehand. It's a pretty complicated process to try to get visas to visit Algeria in the United States. We would have had to fly to New York, do an interview, mail in our passports, and some members of our group, like Jared and Rachel, can't really mail in their passports because they travel so much for their jobs, they need them all the time. So it was much easier for us to do these visas on arrival, but then that did cause us this delay. So then when we finally got to Algiers last night, it was about midnight, and we did have to wait for about an hour for our visas to get processed. That all went really smooth and fine. Oh my gosh, we're finally here! We finally got to our hotel at 2 a.m. Here's the view from our hotel room. And got about 4 hours of sleep, and now we're up and ready to start our first day touring Algiers. So we do have a guide who's going to be with us for the entire trip, and this guide service pretty much planned the whole trip for us. So we actually know a lot less about what we're going to be doing than we normally do, because we kind of just let them take care of it, and we're going to go with the flow and see what happens. I do know that today we're doing a walking tour around Algiers, and this should take us pretty much all day. I'm really excited to get out there and see the city, and I'm really excited to start trying Algerian food. And yeah, I feel like I'm rambling. I tried to film last night, but I was just so delirious that I was rambling even worse. Hopefully I'm gonna get into the swing of things, get over this jet lag, and I know we're gonna have a really fun day today. Hi, this is Editing Katie here. I'm just putting the final touches on this video, and I wanted to pop in and say that our trip to Algeria turned out to be really fantastic, and it would not have been the same without our guides from Isa One Travel. This isn't sponsored or anything, I just think they did an amazing job from start to finish, so if anybody out there is thinking about planning a trip to Algeria, I would highly recommend booking with them, and I will link their website in the description box of this video. Alright, now let's actually get into it. Our day began at the National Museum of Antiquities and Islamic Arts, where we got our first look at some of the amazing historical artifacts we could expect to see throughout our trip. We were particularly excited by the ancient Roman mosaics and statues, since we were all really looking forward to exploring Roman ruins later in the week. Next, we visited the Bardo Museum, which is a Moorish palace that's been turned into a museum of African art. The palace was decorated with lavishly painted tiles, and there were lots of rooms and corridors to explore, which gave us a glimpse into what life would have been like for the palace's 18th century occupants. I'm actually just filming Jared's legs. My favorite part of the day was, without a doubt, our visit to the Kasbah. This walled city is a UNESCO World Heritage Site due to its historic mosques and palaces, along with its traditional architecture. We got to visit a palace and a mosque before walking to a fortress that was once used for the production and storage of gunpowder. Then we explored the narrow maze of the Kasbah streets as we walked downhill toward the Mediterranean Sea. We made a quick stop for tea and pastries before climbing up the winding staircase of an old woodworking shop to reach a viewpoint overlooking the city and the sea. Algiers is known as the White City because of its many whitewashed buildings that gleam in the sunlight. After leaving the viewpoint, we continued our walk onto a street with distinctly French architecture, where we stopped to try some stuffed flatbreads called majuba, which were ridiculously good.
He bought more.
There was another palace nearby, and we got to go inside for a visit before walking past the beautiful Quechua Mosque on our way to Martyrs Square and the seashore. A pleasant walk along the sea brought us to a more modern section of the city, where we got to admire the neo-Moorish architecture of the Grand Post building and see a statue of Emir Abdelkader, who founded the Algerian state and was a leader in the Algerian fight against French colonial rule in the 19th century. Our first day ended with a dinner of traditional Algerian foods like hamis, couscous, and shakshuka. Our tour of Algiers yesterday was amazing. It's such a beautiful city, and we learned so much about the culture and history here. Today we're headed to another city on the Mediterranean called Tipaza. We are going to see our first ancient Roman ruins of the trip. It took about an hour to drive to our first stop of the day in Cherchell, where we visited the Archaeological Museum, which houses an expansive collection of Roman statues and mosaics that were excavated in the Cherchell area. One notable sculpture in the museum is a bust of Cleopatra Selene II, who was the daughter of Cleopatra VII and Mark Antony. After the fall of the Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra Selene was captured and brought to Rome by Caesar Augustus. Later, she was married to King Juba II of Numidia, and together they ruled the Roman client kingdom of Mauritania from the thriving capital city of Caesarea, which was where modern-day Cherchell now stands. There aren't many excavated ruins to see in Cherchell today, and the museum definitely boasts the most impressive collection of artifacts, but we did get to take a short walk through town to see a handful of small archaeological remains.
He's like, why are you petting a bag when you could be petting me?
Next, it was time to drive back to Tipaza. We stopped along the way to get a distant look at an ancient Roman aqueduct. We arrived in Tipaza around lunchtime and stopped to eat at a seafood restaurant. I wasn't hungry, but that did not stop me from ordering a baked camembert drizzled with honey. After lunch, we finally got to visit the day's main attraction, the seaside ruins of Roman Tipaza. Immediately after entering the site, we found ourselves standing in the middle of a gladiatorial arena, and even got to go into one of the chambers where gladiators would have waited for the start of a fight. I'm petting a cat in a gladiatorial arena.
It's a lion.
It's a lion. We stood between two temples that sit on either side of an ancient road, then followed a road lined with pillars all the way down to the sea, where we enjoyed a breathtaking view of the ruins backdropped by the sapphire waters of the Mediterranean and distant mountains. Later, we hiked over to the other side of the bay to get another perspective of the ruins. The basilica was a major highlight, with its mosaic floors still in place some 1,600 years after the church's construction. With perfect weather and beautiful views in every direction, we all thoroughly enjoyed our stroll along the cliff tops.
Everybody wave! Hit the hand!
On our way out of Tipaza, we stopped to see its amphitheater and fountain. Then we got back into our van for a short drive over to the Royal Mausoleum of Mauritania. This is thought to be the tomb of King Juba II and Cleopatra Selene II. However, if the pair was actually buried here, their bodies are no longer inside. The mausoleum is also known as the Tomb of the Christian Woman because one of its false doors has a cross shape on it. But the tomb predates Christianity, so this cross is just decorative. After our visit to the mausoleum, we got coffee and tea at a nearby restaurant. Then we rode back to Algiers for dinner. I ordered harira, which is a really delicious soup, and everyone snuck a bite of Rachel and Vince's tagines.
It's exactly the same.
The next morning, we got up at sunrise to get an early start out of Algiers. We have an early morning today because we are about to leave Algiers and head to Constantine. Along the way today, we're going to stop at another ancient Roman site called Djémila. And other than that, it's going to be about a 6-hour drive, maybe even more. So We are ready to get going in just a few minutes here. And yeah, it's gonna be a long one, but it should be really fun. After a few hours on the road, I was happy to finally get a distant view of our destination, but this glimpse was nothing compared to what we would experience when we finally arrived in Djémila. We stopped at the site's museum first, and my jaw very literally dropped open as we stepped inside. All of these mosaics were removed from the floors of the ancient city, and it was utterly overwhelming to stand surrounded by them. I can't even comprehend the amount of work and money that would have gone into creating these. This was truly astounding. Our site guide walked us through the museum, explaining what all of the images on the mosaics were depicting. Then we followed him outside, where we found a sprawling city of crumbled stone nestled in between two mountains. The ruins of Djémila are unique because they showcase how the Romans were able to adapt their architecture to fit into a mountain environment when they built the city in the 1st century AD. We visited the city's basilica and baptismal, then walked to a nearby hilltop to get a view of its impressive amphitheater. From there, our site guide returned to the museum, and we went further into the ancient city, stopping at the Severan Temple, which is undoubtedly one of the most striking remains at the site. We tried some fruit from a nearby tree before heading down to the Forum to see some more of the city's most beautiful sights. So we're at the ancient Roman site of Djémila right now. This is really, really amazing. This huge ancient Roman city that's just left out here in the mountains. The French excavated it in the 1900s, and there's hardly anybody else here.
That's what men do.
Fan yourself.
I can't.
There you go.
The ancient market reminded me that I had an art fair coming up when I got back home.
This vendor sucks.
We're out for today. Sorry,
If
go
I give you a
home.
second credit card.
Still out. But thank you though.
And a third.
Thank you. Happy donations.
We followed an old road back to the Forum, where we got an amazing view of the Triumphal Arch with the Severan Temple in the background. Then we got to explore the city's bathhouse, where residents would have gone to enjoy different temperatured rooms called the Frigidarium, Tepidarium, and Calidarium. There were some beautiful remnants of the mosaic floors near the bathhouse. Lastly, but perhaps most importantly, we checked out the ancient toilets, which were actually really nice. By now, we were all hungry for a delicious local lunch before getting back on the road. After a few more hours of driving, we made it to the Protea Hotel in Constantine, where we had just enough time to drop off our bags and gawk at our fantastic room view before going back out to dinner, which was an amazing 3-course meal followed by tea. My favorite dish at this meal was the burek, which was stuffed with mashed potatoes and onions in this case. Later on, the 6 of us caught up on the latest episode of Survivor back at the hotel before going to sleep. We all had a great time yesterday at Djémila. It was probably our favorite day of the trip so far, and today we're kind of doing a similar thing again. We're going to another ancient site called Timgad. Yesterday we pulled into Constantine for the night. When we got to our hotel last night, we realized that we have the most beautiful view of the city, so I'm just going to show this right here in the morning light. The old bridge over there. And the new bridge over here. After breakfast, we all packed back into the van for another road trip, making a quick stop at Medkasen, an ancient Numidian tomb. Then we drove out to Timgad, where we stopped into the site museum to check out its mosaics. This mosaic's eyes follow you when you walk across the room. We followed an ancient stone road that was lined with aqueducts into the heart of Timgad. Timgad was founded by Emperor Trajan at approximately 100 AD and was originally used as a military colony and occupied mostly by Roman veterans and colonists. The toilets were our first stop this time, and these ones were even nicer than the ones at Djémila. Everyone played a round of this ancient betting game before we visited Timgad's amphitheater. We're standing in an ancient Roman theater right now, and there's some really interesting acoustics in here.
Come on, come on.
So I'm standing right here, and it sounds pretty normal, and then I move one step over this way, and my voice projects.
Popcorn, get your popcorn.
This is the exact spot to stand.
Can you hear me whisper?
Yes.
Barely.
Here's the tiniest stone.
Hear that drop.
Whoa.
Trajan's Arch is an obvious highlight of the site, and I also enjoyed seeing Timgad's market. There were carvings above each stall to signify what the vendors sold. After leaving Timgad, we stopped for lunch where we met this falcon. Then we made one last stop on our way back to Constantine to visit Lambasis, which was a Roman military base founded sometime in the 120s AD. The ruin looked really beautiful with the setting sun hanging low behind it, so this was a great time of day for a visit. After we left Lambasis, we drove back to Constantine for one last night at the Protea Hotel. Vince and I just finished breakfast. It's our last breakfast at the Protea Hotel, and we are just doing some last minute packing because we are going to be leaving today to go to Ghardaïa, which is much further south. So we're going to be flying instead of driving. But before that, we are visiting one more Roman site called Tidis, and then we're coming back to Constantine to do a walking tour of the city. All of us have really been looking forward to Constantine, so we can't wait for that. Yesterday's tour involved a lot of driving in the van, and today it's going to be a little less so. We are going to have to drive a little bit to get to Tidis, and then after that it's just going to be walking the whole day until our 10 p.m. flight. It's going to be another long one, but we're all really looking forward to it, and we really can't wait to check out some of these famous bridges around Constantine. This was by far the most packed day of our trip, and we started it with a brief visit to the Serta Museum, which was full of art and cultural artifacts. There were lots of paintings depicting the city of Constantine and its gorges and bridges, which only got me more hyped to see them later on. The drive up to Tidis was quite scenic, and the site itself was pretty dissimilar from Djémila and Timgad. The stone here was reddish, so the ruins were also reddish, which made for a striking contrast with the blue sky. Tidis is very old, and its early history dates back to the 4th century BC. We hiked uphill through the site, passing by striking arches, stone altars, and a really gorgeous mountain landscape. The Roman baths were at the top of the mountain, along with a set of water tanks. This was our turnaround point, and after this we hiked back downhill and rode back to Constantine to continue our tour at the Palace of Ahmed Bey. The palace was constructed between 1825 to 1835 for Ahmed Bey ben Mohammed Sharif, who was the last bey of Constantine before it fell to French colonial rule a mere 2 years after the bey moved into his palace. Because of this, parts of the palace were updated under French control, resulting in an interesting mixture of Ottoman and French colonial architecture. Personally, I like the Ottoman parts of the palace better. It's all about the hand-painted tiles for me. By the time we left the palace, I was actually super hungry, which did not happen often on this trip because we ate so much food. Luckily, there was an Algerian pizza shop around the corner, and this was exactly the pick-me-up I needed. Algerian pizza is way different from what we think of as pizza in the US, and it was so delicious. After lunch, we rode down into the gorge that borders Constantine for a quick photo stop at the Falls Bridge. This was, in my opinion, the most beautiful natural spot of our trip. There was a massive waterfall and a river and a natural arch spanning across the canyon below the Tlemcen bridge. There used to be a trail of hanging bridges built into the side of the gorge, but we could see that they were in disrepair and definitely not safe to walk on. But wow, that would be such a cool hike if it was still functional. Next, we drove up to the other side of the canyon, through some tunnels carved out of the cliff, and stopped at a viewpoint along the way. We stopped at a French World War I memorial before continuing on to cross the Tlemcen bridge by foot. The views from the bridge were just spectacular. And I also really enjoyed the spectacle of watching huge flocks of pigeons fly around. After we crossed the bridge, we were in the city, and it was time to visit the local market for some shopping, although mostly we just bought snacks. Rude. We took an elevator to get down to Bab el-Contra Bridge, which had more amazing views of the gorge and the city of Constantine. Then we went back up the elevator for an afternoon coffee stop where I got a pina colada mocktail. And after all that, our day still wasn't over. We visited the Emir Abdelkader Mosque, where we were able to take a quick look inside just as the call to prayer began. Then we got dinner before heading to the airport for our late night flight to Ghardaïa, where we checked into Hotel Belvedere. Alright, after a really fun, really long day in Constantine, we flew into Ghardaïa late last night. This is going to be the southernmost point of our trip in Algeria, and this area has been continuously inhabited for over 1,000 years. So this is a 1,000-year-old city that we're going to get to explore today. We're really excited to learn about the culture and the history here, and to see some of their amazing architecture. And we've also heard that there's really good shopping here for handicrafts and artworks. So we are going to be visiting the souk today as well, and I think us girls are all really eager to get some shopping in. Right away, we could tell that Ghardaïa was totally different from all of the other Algerian cities we'd visited so far. It's in the Muzab Valley in the Sahara Desert, and everything about the city and local culture was designed for survival in such a harsh, dry environment. We began our day at the market, and all of us were looking for some handmade rugs to bring home. It was really hard to choose though, because there were rugs in all sorts of colors, patterns, and sizes. Vince and I ended up getting a small one to hang on the wall because I just can't fathom walking on something this beautiful. We went deeper into the narrow streets of the market where we found dried goods, antique stores, and an old pharmacy. Then we went to visit the food stalls where we tried some local dates.
That is good. That's like the best date I've ever had.
That's incredible.
It's like
By the time we circled all the way through the food market and back to the square, everyone had packed up for the morning and the market was totally deserted, which was a shocking difference from how busy it had been just a half hour earlier. With the market closed, we got to visit a couple more viewpoints around the city and a palm grove before taking a drive out to a settlement in a more rural area where we learned about Ghardaïa's system for collecting, storing, and distributing water during the rare occasions that rainstorms flood the valley. This is a massive effort that requires cooperation from the entire community, and it's supported by selling dates that are grown in palm groves. The amount of water a household is allotted directly corresponds to the number of date palms on their property. Next, we visited CCDS, a cultural center that is working to preserve as much information as they can about the culture and history of the Ghardaïa region. We got to look through their collection of books, photographs, and maps, and go up to the roof for a nice view of the surrounding city. We ended our day tour with a walk through the village of Beni Izgen, where we wandered through its maze of narrow pedestrian streets until we reached a tower at the edge of the city's walls. We climbed up the winding staircase to the top of the tower, where we got to see the village bathed in the golden light of sunset as the sun sank down behind a nearby mountain. When the sun had disappeared for the night, we followed our guide back out of the village, and then we all went for a special dinner that Izawan's owner, Abdu, had arranged for us. The meal consisted of 3 courses of fantastic local food, after which we got to enjoy a live performance while we had dessert and tea. The music was infectious, and soon the guys got up to join in a dance to finish off the night. It's about 6 a.m. right now. We were out pretty late last night at that performance and dinner we went to. So it's a tired morning, but we do have to get to the airport. We are leaving Ghardaïa, headed back to Algiers for the day, and then later this evening we have another flight to Oran. We're gonna check out the Monument of the Martyrs in Algiers today, and we're gonna get to go to a green space, a botanical garden in the middle of the city. And then tomorrow is gonna be our big day in Oran. And then we're going to Tlemcen, and then the trip is over, which I could stay longer. I would really love to stay in Ghardaïa a couple more days. It's been really interesting here. We've learned so much about the local culture. But yeah, it's almost time to go, so I've got to just do some last minute packing, and then we'll be off to the airport. The sun was rising as we drove to the airport, and it was already getting hot out by the time we boarded our plane. I had a nice nap during the flight, so I was feeling a lot more energetic when we landed in Algiers and headed out for a second day of touring the capital city. First, we went to the Martyrs Memorial, which sits on a prominent hilltop and commemorates the Algerian War for Independence. There were lots of football fans in town because Algiers was playing Oran later that day. From the top of the hill, we took a cable car down to Hama Botanical Garden. This massive garden was planted by the French as an experiment to test out whether they could grow imported plants in the area. Clearly, the experiment was a success because the garden has become a veritable jungle in the middle of the city. We ate lunch and, of course, dessert under a grove of tall palm trees. Later, we walked through the garden where we climbed over the roots of buttressed trees and watched ducks swim in a tranquil pond. This was probably the coolest tree we saw. It's one of the oldest in the garden and was apparently used as a set in an old Tarzan film. I also really loved how the garden had these avenues that were lined with a single species of tree, like bamboo or figs.
I mean, who doesn't like walking underneath a tree tunnel? When we got back to the French section of the garden, the fountain was on, so we stopped to watch that for a bit before exiting the garden and going across the street to the Museum of Fine Arts. Inside, we wandered through exhibits of sculptures and halls of paintings, and enjoyed a couple of rooftop viewpoints overlooking Hama Garden. Later that evening, we caught our short flight to Oran, where we got wood fire pizza for dinner in a very lively neighborhood before checking into our hotel. Okay, we just arrived in Oran a few hours ago, went into town, got some dinner, and now we're at our hotel, Le Palme. We were originally supposed to have a 2-night stay here. However, the plan has changed because the owner of the tour agency that we've been traveling with has decided to switch us to a 5-star hotel in Tlemcen for our last night of the trip. So tomorrow, after our day 2 of Oran, we're going to drive to Tlemcen and stay in the Renaissance Hotel, which looks fantastic. Thank you, Abdu. We're all very excited for this. We're just about ready to head out into Oran for the day. We're gonna have a tour of the city, and we are back on the Mediterranean, so I'm expecting some beautiful sea views. Our day tour began at the Sacred Heart Cathedral of Oran, which was built in the early 1900s and was converted into a library in the 1980s. After leaving the cathedral, we walked to the nearby Disco Maghreb, a permanently closed record shop that was featured in the music video for DJ Snake's song, Disco Maghreb. We walked to a square that was surrounded by really beautiful French-style buildings, our favorite being the Opera House. Just down the road was Abdallah Ben Salam Mosque, which was formerly an Orthodox Jewish synagogue. Next, we visited the Bey's Palace, which was built during the Ottoman period in the 18th century. We got to explore the tunnels and dungeons of the citadel first. This part of the tour was very spooky and mysterious, and there was something interesting to discover around every corner.
Are you scared?
No.
Jared is
Best person ever.
Jared's a bad man.
Katie will bleep that part out in the video.
Yeah, I'm gonna bleep out the word bad, so
Jared,
we'll just say Jared's a
sound worse
man.
than metal.
After we emerged from the dungeons, it was time to visit the palace, which is currently undergoing restorations. I get why they're working on restoring this palace, but actually I thought it was really cool to get to see it like this. You can still tell how beautiful the architecture is, but you feel more of a sense of the time that has passed between the Ottoman Empire and present day. I felt more like we were out exploring than in a museum, and it was very enjoyable. There was a great view of a nearby mosque from inside one of the rooms at the palace. Next, we rode up a mountain to go see what's probably the most iconic tourist destination in Oran, the Fort and Chapel of Santa Cruz. Before French colonial rule, Oran had a few periods of Spanish control that are still evident today in the Spanish language influence on the local dialect. The Fort of Santa Cruz was built by the Spanish from 1577 to 1604 and was eventually occupied by the French in 1831. We walked up a steep hill and then made our way to the top of the fort, stopping to explore its various rooms and points of interest along the way. When we finally stepped out onto the top of the fort, we got to enjoy a breathtaking view of Oran. This has got to be the best view in the city. We're standing on top of Santa Cruz Fort right now, which was operated during the 16th century here in Oran, and this is the most beautiful view of Oran. The entire city is behind us. We can see everything. The call to prayer started while we were up there, and hearing the call echo up to us from mosques all over the city gave me goosebumps. It was such a cool thing to witness. On our way back down the mountain, we stopped to visit the chapel. There was a church service in session, and we were allowed to slip into the back of the chapel and catch the end of the service. For lunch, we tried carantica, which is a specialty dish of Oran that was introduced by the Spanish. After lunch, we got dessert and then walked along the corniche before leaving town. We left Oran and now we are back in the bus on our way to Tlemcen, and everybody's sleeping. It was dark by the time we arrived at the Renaissance Hotel, which sits atop a plateau overlooking the city of Tlemcen. The hotel was unbelievable. I haven't stayed in very many 5 stars in my life, and I was definitely impressed. But I have to admit, I was tempted to just fall into this ridiculously comfy bed and skip dinner entirely when we arrived.
It took us a little longer to get here than we were expecting, but this hotel is so beautiful. I think it's going to be a really comfortable night tonight, and we are going to get dinner here instead of going out again. This is really a 5-star experience, and once again, thank you, Abdu. We can't believe this. This is really amazing.
I decided to rally, and we chose to eat at the hotel's Italian restaurant, which was really good and a fun way to end the day.
Okay, this is it. It is our last day in Algeria. We still have a tour of Tlemcen today. Then after that, we're flying back to Algiers, and then we've got a really early morning flight to Rome, and from then on, we're flying home. I lost my voice a little bit. It's starting to warm up, but yeah, my throat's a little messed up today. So we'll see how this day goes for me, but I'm sure that it's still gonna be a fun time, and we're really gonna try to make the most of our last day here.
We had breakfast on the veranda of the Renaissance, then we checked out and rode down the plateau into the city, where we plan to visit some museums to start off our day.
Right now we're in Tlemcen's Islamic Calligraphy Museum, which was actually closed, but they were kind enough to open it and give us a tour. There's lots of beautiful examples of calligraphy in here, and also the building is in what used to be a mosque, and the building itself has really intricate plaster carvings, which are just gorgeous.
A site guide from the museum gave us a very in-depth tour and explained all of the different styles of calligraphy they had on display. Then he led us down the street a ways, where we were able to visit the Great Mosque of Tlemcen, which was pretty surprising to us because it's not typical for tourists to be able to enter mosques in Algeria. We were really grateful for the opportunity to go inside.
Once again, the spot we were trying to visit was closed, but we still got to go in because our guide talked to the security guards and they let us in. That was very nice of them. We're really excited to go see it. It's called Al Mashouar Palace.
By the time we arrived at the palace, we were fully engulfed in a dust storm, but that didn't stop us from enjoying our time there. The palace was very beautiful, and it's a great example of Moorish architecture that dates back to the 12th century. One of the major highlights of this stop was the wonderful craftsmanship of the intricate plaster carvings throughout all of the rooms. Back out in the dust storm, we drove over to nearby Mansoura, where we visited the ruins of a large historic mosque that was built in the early 1300s. All that remains of the mosque now is the minaret and sections of crumbling wall. We all thought that the sepia tone of the dust storm gave this site a very dramatic, sort of apocalyptic vibe. It was honestly pretty cool and definitely a new experience for me. I can't say I've ever been stuck in a dust storm before this. Yeah, I have no idea why David thought he could befriend this cat by giving it his phone.
So we came back up to the top of the plateau that our hotel was on, and we're supposed to have a really good view from here, but it is a dust storm right now. So if you ever wondered what it's like being in a dust storm, it's really yellow, and everything on me is now coated in a fine layer of dust.
And when I say everything, I mean my eyeballs, my teeth. Anyway, the view of the city was somewhat obscured, but again, we weren't really disappointed because we thought it was cool. After the viewpoint, we had time for one more surprise stop. This wasn't on our itinerary, but we were able to visit the cave of Beni Ad, which is a stunningly beautiful and vast cave that is rumored to connect to Morocco. This cave is a very popular destination, and for good reason, as its stalactite and stalagmite formations are jaw-dropping. The cave can be very crowded on a busy day, but aside from our group, there were only 2 other visitors inside when we went, which made the experience even better since we were able to walk around freely and spend as much time as we wanted marveling at all of the different chambers. Back outside, the atmosphere was even oranger than before. Funnily enough, my GoPro did a lot of automatic color correcting, so the footage off of my GoPro doesn't look as close to real life as the super orange footage off of my Canon. But our last stop of the trip was to the El Arit waterfalls, where David, Vince, and Bonnie finally got to satiate their desperate need to climb something that had been plaguing them all week. Then we were off to the airport and on our way home. I couldn't believe our time in Algeria was over. It felt like we were there for much longer than 9 days because we got to see so much of the country and explore so many different periods of its fascinating and complex history. This was such an amazing trip, and I feel extremely lucky to have gotten to visit Algeria, which is a country that I never thought I would get to visit in my wildest dreams.
That's your slow motion.
What is that? David, what did you do, David? It's so big!
Oh, Jared, you're right. This is David's fault. David,
Oh my goodness.
David. Dang it, David.
Oh, you can tell I didn't get enough sleep last night.
Rachel, you look so engrossed. What are you reading over there? Birds of the Air Travel.
Wow, I wonder who wrote that.
It's fascinating.